Well, I want to welcome you to our 2014 Stewardship Campaign and to this new 4-week sermon series entitled, How to Change the World. You could probably just bop it and it would change, but there's our world. And I'd like to begin with this quote from Margaret Mead, a famous anthropologist. There it is. "Never doubt," she said, "that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." I love that. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Over these last, it's not on. Over these last 5 weeks, we've been talking about this man, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and the impact that he has made in our world, on countries, nations, cultures, on arts and culture and education and medicine and social services. And yet, through that time, it becomes more and more obvious that Jesus' primary reason for coming into this world wasn't all about the fulfillment of our deeper, fuller, more personal lives with Christ, but is to prepare us, to heal us, and to empower us, to get us ready to go out and change the world in Jesus' name. To take our part in what the Jewish Mishnah calls the Tikkun Olam, the very healing of the entire world. This was Jesus' mission. It's clear we reinforce this. We give our nod to this every time, every week when we pray the Lord's Prayer together. And what do we say? This prayer that Jesus taught us to pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. What do we say? Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done right here, right now, here on earth, as it is in heaven. When Jesus began his ministry and he went to the synagogue in his own hometown and he read that passage from Isaiah, he was saying, this is my mission. My mission is to proclaim the good news to the poor, to set the captives free, to release the oppressed, to heal the blind, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. What we need to really understand, and we need to never forget, is that Jesus Christ did not start a church and then give it a mission. Jesus Christ started a mission and then gave it a church. Do you understand that distinction? Jesus didn't start a church and then give it something to do. Jesus came to start a mission and then he gave it a church to fulfill it. We are that church. And this is our mission. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about what it looks like, what we need to do, how we need to prepare ourselves. If we're going to take our part in this Tikkun Olam, this healing of the world, if we're going to take our part in this radical, revolutionary idea of Jesus's to change the world, to bring the kingdom of God from heaven down here onto earth in our time, in this place. And so over the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about different ways that we prepare ourselves, because we believe at the root of the conviction of this sermon series is that changing our world is intimately connected to changing the world. That if we're going to go out and we're going to take up this mission in Jesus Christ's name, there are some things that we need to do inside of ourselves first. We need to prepare ourselves. We need to open ourselves up to being changed so that we can go out and make a difference in Jesus' name. That there are certain things that we need to let go of, that there are certain things we need to build into our lives, that there are things that we need to do that are very different from the normal norms and values of our society that we need to turn our back on. We need to challenge the status quo a bit if we're going to become the kind of people who are to be called on this mission. And so today, what we want to talk about is how we even create the space for this to happen. How do we prepare some room in our overscheduled, overly crazy lives, for us to find a place where God can come in and be a part of creating this mission within us. The Apostle Paul, when he was writing to the book of Philippians, was speaking out of a place of personal experience. When he said, "Not that I am referring to being in need, for I have learned to be content. To be content with whatever I have. I know what it is to have little, and I know what it is to have plenty. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being well-fed and of going hungry, of having plenty and of being in need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me." Contentment. It's not a word that we hear a whole lot today in 21st century America, especially here on the west side of Los Angeles, is it? My guess is that there's not a lot of people in the circles that you run around with who talk about being content very much, are there? In fact, if anything, I think it's become a little bit of a bad word in this day and age, hasn't it? We equate contentment with complacency, don't we? In a time and a place when we're supposed to be hungry, we're supposed to be striving and reaching and doing more and making more happen, like the most interesting guy in the world on the Dos Equis commercials. What does he say? "Stay thirsty, my friends." Right? That is what is expected of us. We live in a world, and pardon me if I sound like a bit of a conspiracy theorist here, if I sound like I'm paranoid, but I think it's pretty clear that ever since the Industrial Revolution, some governments, some countries and cultures have been really clear about this, not trying to hide it under the covers at all, that if we can create a society where people are always reaching and striving for more, where they're always worried about climbing the next ladder and the next promotion and the next job and the next car and the next house and the next thing, whatever it is, they will keep their eyes down, their heads forward, and they will not be a problem. They will be able to be controlled. They'll be able to be kept in check. I mean, this is something that governments have talked about throughout the centuries. Allow people to stop reaching and striving and putting the carrots out in front of them, and you could have a revolution on your hands, right? I mean, this is at the basis of our entire economic system, isn't it? This striving, this mad, obsessive pressure to do more and grab more and have more and do more. The first time that I started investing in stocks, I was unbelievably rudely awakened to the fact that the best, biggest, most successful companies in the world, the ones that are at the top of their fields, that have the very best product and the largest market share and doing things perfectly well, the ones at the very top of their game, are a terrible investment. Why is that? Because our system doesn't just reward those who are doing a great job and creating and strong and at the top of their game. We reward those that are growing and expanding and doing more than they were before. Those at the top of the field, they don't have a lot of room to keep growing, and so the good investments are the ones that can keep going and getting bigger and doing more. And of course, along with that, you need not just this expansion, but you need to keep the money moving, right? Isn't that Economics 101? That we have to make sure that there's always a way to keep it going, or else the economy is just a few months away from collapsing in on itself. Do you remember after 9/11 when we were all saying, what can we do to help our country? Remember what our politicians were saying? Go shopping! Because we need to keep the money moving. The American economist, Thorstein Veblen, was the first one to coin this term, conspicuous consumption, to refer to the luxury items, cars, automobiles, and clothes and food that we create to try to separate people from their money. And that many of the things that we buy have more to do with us trying to make a statement about who we are, who we wish we were, instead of fulfilling any sort of real need or even any real want. And so Veblen argues that throughout our country, we are all manipulated into satisfying artificially created wants and desires while we allow the basic needs of so much of the world to go unfulfilled. Dissatisfaction, discontentment is sown into the very seeds of our society and our existence. This idea of contentment that Paul is talking about, in so many ways, is the enemy of our society. Isn't it? Over the last few years, there's been a little bit of a backlash against this idea. They call a simplicity revolution going on. It's not making a huge dent, but at least it's showing our desire to get off of the treadmill, to ramp down from all of this obsessive need for more and more and more, and to start paring back. I think that the recession has helped some people to start keying back on some things, to start emptying their lives a little bit, to start thinking about what's actually important, what actually makes a difference, what is worth my time and my attention. Because it's true, isn't it? That there are a few things in this life that are really important, that really count, that really make a difference, that really matter. And there is so much that we spend so much of our time with that's just not important at all, that ultimately is going to make no difference, and it's not going to matter at all at the end of the day. More and more around us, we see this sort of move towards simplification. We see it in our technology. Apple, the first company to grab a larger share of the market by doing less, right? By having one button on their iPhone that you push, having fewer options and fewer things to choose from. What's the catchphrase today? Plug and play. You don't want to have a lot of choices, a lot of complication. You want to be able to just plug it in and have it work. Google gets 75% of the searches that are done online are done through Google. And they have this incredibly simplistic homepage. You know what I'm talking about, right? You go to the Google homepage, and all you have is the dialog box to type your search in. It's like 90% of the screen is just white. It's because they realize that we're longing for simplicity. We're getting confused and overwhelmed and distracted by all of the extra stuff in this world. When we were doing the website, our new website, I don't know if you've been on it yet, but I keep getting kind of nervous because it looks way too simple. The homepage is just this little box with a few choices here, and I'm like, we need more. We need buttons. We need things to go to. And they keep telling me, no, this is what people want. We see it in architecture. USA Today recently came out with an article saying that after decades and decades of new homes getting bigger and bigger and bigger, we're finally starting to see that trend reverse a little bit. In one of the articles, they talked about cottages and cottaging. It's a new term that architects and interior designers are using, not because homes actually are cottages, but this desire for smaller, more intimate spaces that are well laid out and well functioning and really done to enhance life. We see it in movies. I mean, the big blockbusters are still coming out, but what's the fastest growing area in movies is these indie films, right, that are done on a shoestring budget, and they even now are starting to imitate camera work that looks like it's being done by a simple camera, by an amateur. Isn't that right? We see it even in civil engineering. There's more and more studies being done about the hecticness of our roadways. It used to be that whenever there was a problem, they just put up more signs or did more things to try to fix it. Now they're talking about there are too many signs. They're starting to take away curbs and take away signs. Even there was a study done recently that said that if you take away the center line in a road, there are less accidents that happen. Because people start paying more attention to the car that's coming towards them, and not so distracted by all of the stuff and signs and signals that they're being fed from all around. It's interesting, Jesus, when you think about it, Jesus' mission, in part, was a mission and a revolution of simplicity, wasn't it? He was coming to tell us that all that really matters is a few things, that there's a heart of this faith that we need to get back to. I mean, he was coming into an incredibly complicated religious situation that was suffocating under all of the rules and all of the extra stuff and all of the more that was happening there. You had the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and the Essenes and the Herodians and the Zealots. All of these people with different ideas about how you were supposed to draw close to God. Over the years, they had come up with 1,226 different rules and laws and regulations. Half of those, 613 of them, were derived from the Ten Commandments. In fact, the reason they did 613 is there were 613 characters, Hebrew characters, in the passage that describes the Ten Commandments. And then they picked another 613, so it would mirror it, another 613 laws and regulations that they picked out of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. They then took the commandments, the 10 commandment ones, those 613, and they divided them into 2 different categories. Affirmative commands, those things you're supposed to do, and negative commands, those things you're not supposed to do. The affirmative, they had 248 of those, which matched what they believed were how many parts of the human body there were. And so the other left 365. There was 248 affirmative commands, 365 negative commands, 1 command for every day of the year. Then they took those and they further divided them into those commands that were binding and those commands that weren't binding. And then they spent all of their days, all of these religious scholars would get together and just argue and debate about which of these 613 rules belonged in which category, and then ranking them from 1 to 613, which was the most to the least important. Can you imagine the revolution it was? When Jesus steps into this situation and they come both to try to trap him, but also to try to just pull him into this heady theological debate about 613 commandments. And they say, well, which one do you think is the most important? He says, you're wasting your time. Everything that you're talking about can be summed up in 2 commandments. He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all of the law and all of the prophets. The 613 that came from the 10 commandments, the 613 that came from the Pentateuch. Everywhere he went, he was fighting back against this complication, this overwhelming busyness, this craziness that they were allowing themselves to get drawn into. Saying over and over again, it's really much simpler than that. All you need to worry about is loving God with all of your heart and loving your neighbor as yourself. Really, ultimately, that is why we are here. And that was Jesus' mission. It's interesting, the church is in a pretty tough place in our society right now. It's getting harder and harder to get people to come to church, but many of the churches that are doing well, the churches that are growing right now, are churches that are embracing a simplicity to their ministry. One church I was reading about as preparing for the sermon was the Christ the King Community Church in Bellingham, Washington. They started a few years ago. They already have tens of thousands of people in satellite churches around Washington, a number of states and countries. And the pastor, when he started the church, he said, I really want to try an experiment of a church that just focuses on these 2 things, loving God more and loving and serving people more. He said, I will come if you all would be willing that we only do 3 things here at this church. We do worship really well. We do small groups really well because that's where people love and get to know each other, and we go out and serve the community well. Those 3 things. And so they agreed, and the elders agreed, and they drew up a little contract on a piece of paper. They got the whole congregation to agree. And for the next 3 years, everywhere he went, he kept a folded up copy of that piece of paper in his pocket. And every time people said, oh, I have a great idea for what we can do next, he'd pull out his sheet and say, is it one of these 3 things? but they're growing in leaps and bounds. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, and mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. Go out and serve your community. It really is as simple as that. You do that, you're going to change the world. And so my question for you this morning is, how complicated is your life? How much contentment do you have? Do you have the time and the space in your life to even have a thriving relationship with God, let alone to join God's revolution and to play your part in the tikkun olam, the changing of the world, if you felt so inclined? Do you have the bandwidth in your life right now? Do you have the time freed up? Do you have the resources, the finances freed up? If you were to feel God's calling, if you were able to discern what God's calling to you is, the unique role that God is asking you to play to help bring God's kingdom down to this corner of the world, if you felt that and you knew it, would you have the space in your life to follow? Or is your life so tightly wound and so completely maxed out right now that a tired, distracted commitment to God is the best that you're going to be able to muster? Over these next 4 weeks, we're going to spend some time in meditation and prayer together, praying about what it would take for God to prepare us to play our part, our God-given role in this radical, revolutionary mission of Jesus's. We're going to pray about what needs to happen inside of us if we're going to play our part in changing the world and bringing God's kingdom here and healing the world. And today we're going to begin just by asking, how do I even create that space? What would it take for me to open up enough room in my life, enough time in my life, enough energy, enough of my thought energy, enough of my finances, that if there was something that came along that I wanted to be part of, that really made me understand why I was put into this world in the first place, that was my God-given calling of what God is asking me to do to help change my part of the world, that there'd be space in our lives to get on board with it. In just a moment, we're going to stop and give you a chance to pray and meditate. We're going to have a little background music playing. Inside your bulletin, there is a little green slip. It says Simplify on one side. And we'd like to invite you, there should be some pencils around you, but maybe not enough. If you have a pencil or a pen in your pocketbook or in your pocket, please take it out. We're going to give you probably 2 or 3 minutes to pray and meditate, and then write down one thing, more than one thing, whatever you want, of what you think God might be suggesting to you that could be simplified in your life. Financial commitments, goals, dreams, the way you spend your time, the commitments you have. What is something that could be simplified in your life to make room for your relationship with God? And then in about 3 minutes or so, I will call the offering, and we're going to dismiss you row by row to come up with both your offering, your tithe for the church, and your green cards, and to put both of them into these baskets and then return back via the side aisles. When I call for the offering, we're going to start singing Take My Life, and we'll sing that together as we're waiting and as we're coming forward. But we want you to spend some time thinking about, praying about, writing down, where would God want you to uncomplicate your life a bit? Where would God want you to carve out some room in your life, to simplify your life, so that you would have the space for becoming the thing you were created to be? Let us spend some time in silent prayer and meditation.